Okay, to use the Bex Query Designer, since this is a standalone program, we can just use the Start menu and then find All Programs, Business Explorer, and then Query Designer. But as I have also mentioned before, there is a shortcut for the program that is stored in the Business Explorer folder on the desktop, so you can access the program either way. After the program is run, you will then see the Query Designer menu and toolbar. A screenshot is shown here to give you some idea about the menu items and the toolbar available. And we'll be using some of the functionality in our assignment. Okay, on this slide, it shows basically how do you define a query, what components are required, and what are optional, and so on. Okay, the required components are shown in red. So first, you need to select an info provider, and secondly, you need to select characteristics from the info provider as default values. Okay, and then the next required item is key figures. So basically, you need an info provider, and from this info provider, you then pick the characteristics and the key figures that you need. And then the next step is to arrange the characteristics and key figures in rows and columns to define the layout of the query. Okay, this is, by the way, very similar to pivot table in Microsoft Excel. Those of you who have used that before. Okay, we just drag and drop characteristics and key figures into rows and columns. Okay, and finally, you save the query, and then you can execute it after that. And then there are a couple of optional items shown in green there, and we'll talk more about them later on. This slide again summarizes the steps that are involved in creating a simple query, okay, which is pretty self-explanatory. Then on this slide, a screenshot is shown for the first step in creating a query. Okay, so basically you need to choose an info provider, and notice that on the right hand side, when you when you are ready to select info provider, there are several options. Okay, in that window you see on the left hand side you have the find option, you have history, and you have info areas, and so on, which is kind of similar to what you will see in Bex Analyzer when you want to open a query. Okay, I mentioned this before that using the Find button is probably the easiest way if you know the name, or at least part of the name of the info provider that you want to use. Okay, and in the history folder, it will store all the info providers you have used before. And finally, the info area basically allows you to drill down to different info areas and find the info provider. Okay, so that's probably the most time-consuming way. All right. Then on this slide, it shows nicely the remaining steps in creating a query. Okay, so for instance, step 2, you choose characteristics, and 3, you choose key figures. Like I said earlier, that you just drag and drop those items from the info provider that you specified earlier, and you just drag and drop them over to the rows/columns area. And then number 5, you can also choose additional characteristics which are free. Again, which means that they will not be displayed automatically when the query is run, but they can be used later on if necessary, if you want to drill down using different characteristics. Okay, and then you can save it, and then you can run the query by clicking the execute icon, which is kind of like a globe icon or World Wide Web. And by the way, after you execute the query, a login window will open. Okay, the login window is from a portal. So for that, you will enter your username and password that I ask you to set up for client 001. Okay, in other words, client 001 is the portal that we used here. So on the login screen, after you run the query, you will enter the username and password for that. And as I suggested, you should have used the same password for both BW, which is client 800, as well as portal, which is client 001. So this way you won't get confused and maybe got locked out if you enter the wrong password.